Hi, welcome back to another episode. Today we are going to talk about books over a cold cup of tea because, I drank it before I didn't record. So, today we are going to talk about books. And here's like a stack in front of me. The stack right here, it's scary looking. And also before I start today's video on some of the books I've enjoyed, don't take this list as like a university prescribed reading list. Don't take any recommendations from me. Simply just look up the books. If you like what the book is about, just put it on your list and read it. Reading is all about enjoyment at this point. Before when you were younger, you were just kind of like, oh, maybe I should read Charles Dickens. Maybe I should read this. Maybe I should read that. But you get a little older, you're just kind of like, no, I just don't have time to push through books that are bugging the hell out of me. So these books that I've read recently, they were some of the most fascinating, some of the most interesting books I've ever read. So here's my list. So I'm going to give you 5 of the books that I have thoroughly enjoyed, and 2 of them that I'm going to start. From today, hopefully, if I get a few hours tonight to get some reading done. So first book, David Sedaris' When You Were Engulfed in Flames. This one is, I think, one of the funnier collections of David Sedaris. Me Talk Pretty One Day, in my opinion, is still like Sedaris' magnum opus. So if you want like a solid introduction into Sedaris' writings, don't go with this one. Go with Me Talk Pretty One Day. After you've read Me Talk Pretty One Day, come back to this one, because this one is significantly bigger than some of the other collections, but it's just full of some of the most ridiculous stories ever. It's full of these anecdotes from his personal life that are just simply delightful to read. So my favorite story in here is Memento Mori, and I think it's right here. So it's basically a story about him buying a human skeleton for his boyfriend for Christmas. So I'm just like, that's one of the most incredible things I've ever read. So I laughed out so loud that my mom was like, "What the hell are you reading?" And now, since I've moved out, no one's going to yell at me for laughing like a devil. So buy this book for yourself. Read it. Don't read it on a train. Don't read it on a bus, because you will get some murderous stares, because this book tends to crack people up like nothing else. So that's the first one on my list, When You're Engulfed in Flames by David Sedaris. Second one is Andy Warhol's The Philosophy of Andy Warhol. This one actually really caught me by surprise. I was visiting a neighboring neighborhood called Carlton, and Carlton has this little bookshop called Readings, and it's by no means little. It's actually one of the biggest bookstores in Melbourne, but they had like a little art section there. And I was interested in like Francis Bacon, and I was interested in like some of these artists. I've been doing some research in art history recently. But then I saw this book by Andy Warhol, and I thought to myself, wow, he's a pretty interesting character. So I knew virtually nothing about Andy Warhol beforehand, but then I picked up this book. And now after 2 days, or might have been yesterday, after a day or so, I'm already halfway through the book. So it's a collection of personal vignettes, personal stories, short stories. They are incredibly entertaining to read. So if you are into kind of like an autobiography of an artist, or like personal philosophy of an artist, this is a very accessible book. You could probably read this if you're a stronger reader. You could read this in one sitting. It's not that difficult of a read, despite having the word philosophy written on the cover. So give this one a go if you are interested in art, if you're interested in visual art, if you're interested in Andy Warhol, the man, and his silly stories when he was in New York. This is the book for you. Next one, really important one. This one for me is very important. Consider This by Chuck Palahniuk. So I've talked about this book before in my episode on pretty sentences or an engaging story. So in that episode, I basically said that for me, an engaging story is more important than pretty sentences. So Chuck Palahniuk in this book, he basically said that there are 2 camps of writers. One camp of writers, they're kind of like the university wits. They were educated university students. They were educated in fields like literature, theater, and in the classics, so to speak. And these students, they tend to write very pretty sentences, but their stories are not that strong. There's not much to their plots. But for the journalist camp, for the camp of journalists, or people that were training journalism, they're really good at telling stories in a very economic fashion, right? Their prose is very simple. The way that they tell the story is very straight to the point. So after reading this book, I thought to myself, yes, I am a literature student, but my God, do I hate complicated writing. Whenever I read like a really sentimental paragraph, whenever I read something that's just borderline poetry packed into prose, my brain just kind of shuts off. And I thought to myself, well, that's obviously not the style that I want to adopt. You know, when you first start writing, that's sort of like every writer goes through this, right? When they first start to write, when they first put pen to the page, they go through this period of very long period of wanting to sound impressive to other people. So they, load their sentences up with adjectives, similes, metaphors, and they think that's capital letter L literature, right? They think that's what it means to write well. But then again, if you give them like a half a decade of writing time, they'll really quickly realize that good writing has nothing to do with pretty sentences. And for me, this is the book that kind of did it. That sort of like reaffirmed my thoughts on this topic. I personally think, this is just me, simple sentences, straight to the point sentences that could tell an engaging story, that's so much more important than packing a sentence with sentimentality. And I'm not that sentimental of a guy. I don't like to write about my emotions. For me, storytelling is simply journalism. And journalism on the everyday, right? For me, it's being a journalist of mundane reality. For me, being a journalist of real life, that's the really interesting part of storytelling for me. So there are two camps of writers, university wits and the journalists of life. And I think after reading this book, I am convinced that I actually belong to the journalist school of thought when it comes down to storytelling. So anyway, that's just something else you should read if you're into writing, if you're into craft. And this is the author of Fight Club, if you don't know him already. So make sure to read this one if you want to practice writing as your craft. And this is kind of like, for me, this is kind of like Stephen King's on Writing 2.0. But this book is also packed full of anecdotes and stories and weird instances and weird personal encounters of Chuck Palahniuk. So pick this one up if that's what you're into. That's another book out of the way. Next one, Murakami's new book, First Person Singular, or First Person Singular. I think because the title is kind of weird like that. So First Person Singular is, in my opinion, if you boil down the Murakami-esque main character to its essence, it is this book, right? So if you want like a general introduction to Murakami, if you don't want to dig through, all the magical realism stuff, if you don't want to dig through, for example, Kafka on the Shore and Norwegian Woods or IQ84, was that the title? I don't remember. If you don't want to dig through some of the bigger works of Murakami, this is basically your gateway drug, so to speak. This is going to give you like a taste of what he's like. This is going to give you a taste of his philosophy of storytelling. This is going to give you a taste of the main character, the Murakami-esque main character, and his ways of explaining reality, right? So it's a very, very short. It's about 200 pages, and it's a very pleasurable reading experience. One thing with Murakami is that I used to work at a bookstore, and the boss of this bookstore basically told me that reading Murakami is like taking a warm bath, which I think is just like the perfect analogy for Murakami. So if you're into kind of like atmospheric writing, if you're into kind of like stories that really draw you into like the emotions of the scene, if you want something that's chill, if you want something that's very like serene, if you want something that's very calm and pleasurable, Murakami is your guy. So pick this one up if you want to get like a general introduction to Murakami. This is like the first. If there's a person that's never read any Murakami, this is like the one that I would recommend to that person. So there it is. 4 books already, and we've got one more to go on audiobook because this book is so difficult to find. I've been through basically all of the thrift stores in Melbourne, but still I couldn't find a book. It is the Lebowitz Reader by Fran Lebowitz. So it is basically a collection of 2 books that she's written. One of them was Metropolitan Life. The other one is Social Studies. So I bought the audiobook and I listened to it. But here's my personal opinion. I feel like Leibowitz's writing, you can't really get the gist of that you can't really get the gist of it just through audiobook, because she writes in this very kind of like list-like fashion, where she actually uses lists in her writing, which is kind of difficult to get the sense of in audio form. But nevertheless, it's a very witty collection of social criticism slash short stories slash funny, comedic writing. That's just like everything. Everything that's right about the person packed into one book. So if you've enjoyed Pretend It's a City on Netflix, if you've enjoyed other talks or other events by Fran Lebowitz, if you've enjoyed public speaking, if you've enjoyed, what's the other one? He's interviews or her interviews with David Letterman, be sure to pick up this one. If you know where to get a copy, please tell me where you could get a copy of Fran Lebowitz's Social Studies and Metropolitan Life, because it will be really interesting to read these editions in print, because the audiobook simply wasn't doing it for me. So that's, in a sense, the end of my rambles on some of the books I've read recently. And here are like the two books that I'm going to crack into. Here are like two books that I'm going to dip into in June. So because I just finished all of my assignments for the last semester, and now I'm just going to the new semester. And I'm just like I have like 2 weeks of holiday, and a lot of time to read. And so the first one is going to be Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. And so this is a collection of plays that I'm going to dip my toes into. I am like 2 pages into it, so I'm really excited to get started. Really excited to dig through the rest of this. And the next one is going to be The Portable Dorothy Parker by Dorothy Parker. And this is a collection of short stories, social criticism, and comedic writing by Dorothy Parker. So I have, I've read like perhaps 10 pages of this, and I really, really enjoyed the first 10 pages. I'm just kind of like, oh my God, you've captured my attention. And now I'm here to read the rest of you. So anyhow, that is basically all of the books on my list, all of the books I've thoroughly enjoyed, and some of the books that I will read in the coming weeks. And that's that. End of my rambles. That's the end. It's finished. It's over. I'll see you guys next time.